Dennis Allen and the Saints have zero excuses to not win the NFC South. Could the Saints finally move on from Andrus Peat? And what the hell is going on with Tre'Quan Smith? Let's talk about that right here on the Straight Up Saints podcast.
You're listening to the Straight Up Saints podcast.
What is up, Who Dat Nation? It's your host, Chris Rosvoglu of the Straight Up Saints podcast. And as always, we're brought to you by Scott Ficknair Injury Lawyers. If you've been injured in any kind of accident, car, truck, 18-wheeler, or hurt offshore, Scott Ficknair handles it all. You can give him a call at 504-500-1111 for a free consultation. They'll always fight for the win. So the preseason is over. The roster deadline's coming up. The Saints have a lot of interesting decisions to make, whether it's at offensive line, whether it's at wide receiver. And I know that a lot of people might still be focused on yesterday's game. There must probably a good faction of people that are just focused on week one against the Titans. But this is an important time for the New Orleans Saints. You're trying to figure out who deserves those final roster spots. You're trying to see what to do with a couple of key veterans, like I mentioned, Andrus Peat and Tre'Quan Smith, and I'll talk about them in just a minute. But before I start with that, I want to focus real quick on the Saints in general and talk about whether or not the preseason validated my beliefs of this team. And while I'm not here to say the Saints are going to win the NFC, while I'm not here to say the Saints are a Super Bowl contender, because games need to be played, trust needs to be won over, and I think the Saints have a long way to go in that department. What I can say about New Orleans is nothing that I thought about this team in terms of the positive things have changed since the preseason. You know, I came in thinking the Saints had the best quarterback in the NFC South, and I still feel that way. I think Bryce Young's going to need time to develop, although I think he's very talented. I think that the Bucs are in a weird spot where maybe Baker revitalizes his career for just a minute, but how long is that going to last? And even if you pay attention to anything going on in Tampa, they can't mention Baker Mayfield without talking about Kyle Trask. Why do you need to bring up Kyle Trask unless you're thinking about making that inevitable quarterback change? So that's a question there. And then you have Desmond Ridder, who hasn't really played yet in the preseason. He played one game, and he needs to really have kind of an explosion this year, I think, for the Falcons to be really, really good. But if he plays average football, they're still going to be competitive because that running game. So quarterback aside, the Saints still have the number one quarterback in the division. But let's look elsewhere. I think one thing for the Saints in terms of focusing on what they've done right is the D-line. I think revamping that unit. Out goes Onyemata, out goes Shai Tuttle, out goes Davenport. In comes a guy like Colin Saunders, who's looked great. In comes a rookie like Brian Brzee, who looks to be the next big thing in terms of really impactful defensive lineman rookies, and I think he's going to be great. You have Nathan Shepard from the Jets. I didn't see enough yet from him, but I think the vision is there for a player of his caliber, so I like the Saints bringing him in. And then you're hoping for some development. Guys like Carl Granderson, guys like Peyton Turner, can they take those next steps? I think they can, so we'll see if that happens there. And of course, guys like Isaiah Foskey from the second round, you bring him in, slow preseason, or at least start to the preseason. Thought he looked impressive last night against the Texans, though, which is what you want to see. You want to see growth in these games. So, like I said, quarterback is still top of the division. Defensive line looks a lot better. How about the depth of the wide receiver room and tight end room? It just looks really talented right now. You know what you get in Juwan Johnson, but you think Foster Moreau can be a player. Jimmy Graham proved last night there's still gas left in the tank. I don't care what anyone says. Jimmy Graham can still make plays for this Saints football team, and I want to see that come week one. And then wide receiver room. You know what you have in Olave. You know what you have in Michael Thomas if healthy, and you know what you have in Rashid Shaheed if healthy. And I think Shaheed and Olave can be even better. So, you know what you have, but there's that kind of sense to you where you're like, I know you can up your game one more level. So we'll see what happens there. But how about the guys behind them? Shaq Davis looked impressive at times. A.T. Perry should make this roster. He had an awesome start to the preseason. Look around. Keith Kirkwood has done enough to make you think, okay, I think he'll be on the 53 for a lot of fans, and that's where you guys are at there. And I'll talk about him, actually, when we get to Tre'Quan. So he's looked good. Even guys like Jontre Kirkland have come in and look really good. So I think the Saints' depth there at a position that for the last couple of years has not been kind to them is finally showing off. So that's good there. And then the kicking battle, whether it's Groupie or Will Lutz, I think the fact that the Saints have had two kickers who are starting caliber go at each other in a positive way in terms of friendly competition, making sure you get the best out of each other, I think that's just more positive for the Saints. So I feel better about their kicking game than I did in July. I feel better about their D-line than I did in July. I feel validated about the wide receiver depth on this team, and I feel better about the tight end room knowing that Jimmy Graham can still make plays. So all those things have come in the positive direction for me. And then the Derek Carr factor hasn't really changed. And I'll be fair. What's negative about the Saints? I'm scared about the punting game, whether it's Headley or Blake Gillikin. I think Gillikin will win the job, but I don't know if that means Gillikin's going to be the best possible option the Saints have. Maybe the punter's not on the roster. We'll look around the league and see what happens. Maybe there were punter battles that we didn't kind of have our eye close on, and the Saints find their guy there. But punting concerns me. There's no doubt about it. I would say the backup offensive linemen, they definitely concern me. There were really, really rough moments yesterday, but also rough moments against the Chargers. So those would be the two concerns for me, offensive line depth and then the punting game. Even linebacker, I think that's a position that I'd be worried about, but guys like Tre'Quan Smith come in and he plays great. So I think the Saints more good than bad, which is what you love to see. So overall, I would say that I'm still feeling pretty good about this roster. So let's get over to the next comment, and we're going to get over to whether or not the Saints can cut Andrus Peat. And I know it's not highlighted on your screen, so please excuse us there. But I think for New Orleans, Andrus Peat is going to be a very interesting roster decision. Very interesting roster decision. Because I don't know genuinely that I can say he will make the roster, and I don't know if there is enough logic to cut him at the same hand. So let's start off with what we know. We know he's on a 1-year remaining deal. We know that whether or not the Saints cut him or keep him, next year, he's got a $13.6 million dead cap charge. So I don't think that should factor whether or not you want to keep him or not, because that is an irrelevant factor to all of this. You can get rid of Andrus Peat tomorrow. Next year will be a $13.6 million dead cap charge. You can keep him for this entire regular season. You're still going to have to deal with that dead cap charge. So get rid of that part. I think that New Orleans, regardless, is going to have to pay that money up anyway. So that's fine. Let's take that out of it. Let's talk about the fact that who he is at this stage in his career. He's no longer the starting left guard for the Saints. I think any question about that got answered in the preseason. It's James Hurst's job. He's healthier and just flat out better right now than Peat. Now, you can argue that Peat being terrible in last night's preseason game is a factor of him missing a lot of time because of a quad injury in camp, not being 100%. So maybe that's what it is. And maybe I'm being a little too harsh on Peat and what he can bring to this Saints team. But I think if you're New Orleans and you look around and you get offered a 5th or a 6th round pick for Peat, you have an interesting decision to make. Now, I don't think a 5th or 6th round pick is something to write home about, but it's more than you'd probably want for a player who's not going to be here next year. Because we got to call it what it is. Peat will not be in New Orleans next season. This is his last season with the Saints. He could have played his last game with the Saints last night. I guess we'll find out in the upcoming days. So I think for New Orleans, it comes down to, do you think at some point this season he'll get healthy and he can be a serviceable backup to possible starter if someone goes down? And if the answer is yes, then you have to keep him on the roster because the rest of the backup offensive linemen are just not good right now. They're not. It's a very poor unit. But in fairness, everyone around the league is struggling with the same problem. Offensive line play in the NFL has never been worse. And I don't know if that's defensive linemen getting better or just the overall talent getting worse or the rules making it harder to be an offensive lineman. I don't know. I really don't know. But the Saints have a decision to make. I don't know if cutting Peat will be the answer because, like I said, this is a bad second string offensive line. But who knows? Maybe the Broncos come in with an offer. Maybe another team comes in, has an offer out there for Peat. We already saw, I think the Steelers made an offensive line trade. Patriots made an offensive line trade. It's possible. This is the time in the offseason, or not even offseason, time in the gap between the preseason and the regular season that things of this nature happen. So I think for Peat, fascinating decision. I can't wait to see what happens here. I'm actually not sure. Like, I'll get to the next topic in a second, and I feel pretty sure about that. I don't feel sure about Andrus Peat. I just think that there's this uncertainty of, do you cut him? Do you trade him? Do you keep him? And honestly, if you can't trade him, I probably would just keep him as a backup because, like I said, you're due that dead cap charge regardless. If you think he's better than your other backup options, keep him. But look, and this is the first time in forever. And by first time forever, I mean legit. I think that there is a chance he's not on this roster. But the Saints need depth, and they don't have any of it right now, which makes it an interesting choice. So let's swing it over to Tre'Quan Smith before I get into any comments that you guys have. And as always, if you're listening and you want to drop in a roster prediction, a question, comment about the Saints Week 1 matchup, whatever the hell it may be that's Saints related or NFL related, or honestly anything that brings you great joy on this Monday morning, just drop it in and I'll pull up your comment in just a second. But let's get into Tre'Quan Smith. We have not seen Tre'Quan in a hot minute because this man is always hurt. And I think for the Saints, there's a tough thing to do here because part of it is like, man, he hasn't played and other guys have stepped up. A.T. Perry, Shaq Davis, Keith Kirkwood, Jontre Kirkland, four right there that have really stepped up in Tre'Quan's absence. But I think the Saints like Tre'Quan for a very definitive reason. They value his run blocking. They value his athleticism. They value his familiarity with the playbook and just being able to know Pete Carmichael's scheme down to a T. But at some level, do you continue to reward a guy who's not healthy? And I know it's unfair to bash someone for their health, but availability is part of the game. And we often say availability is one of the best abilities that a player can have. So I think for Tre'Quan, what the Saints will do, and it's not what a lot of fans want to hear, but I think it's what they will do. I think they will keep him on the 53-man roster. And the way they're going to do that is because he's not healthy right now. I think they'll probably keep him and then put him on IR the minute they're allowed to, and then that'll give them room to bring someone back. Maybe that's Shaq Davis. Maybe that's Keith Kirkwood. I think the Kirkwood one's a little fascinating to me because I don't know if you can cut Keith Kirkwood outright and expect him back in New Orleans because there's a certain coach in Denver called Sean Payton, I'm sure we've all heard of him, that gave Keith Kirkwood his first chance in the NFL. So if he gave Keith Kirkwood his first chance in the NFL, would he want to give him another shot now that Denver's receiving core is down Tim Patrick for the whole year, down to KJ Hamler, and also doesn't have Jerry Jeudy right now? He's dealing with a hammy. So I think that for them, it's a very interesting proposition, but I think that Tre'Quan will be back. I think he'll start the year on short-term IR, and in an ideal world, the Saints are able to bring back, let's say, Keith Kirkwood or Shaq Davis, right? And that'll be the other wide receiver to go with Michael Thomas, Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, and A.T. Perry. So I think that's where we're at. And unlike the Pete thing, I kind of feel like that is definitely what's going to happen. Whether or not people like that, that's up to you. I mean, you can all have your opinions of Tre'Quan Smith, and I do think that Tre'Quan Smith is a flawed player, but you're also not expecting a superstar as your wide receiver 4. And if you are, that's because you're playing fantasy football. So I think for Tre'Quan, he will be back, but it's a scary thing to go get rid of Tre'Quan or keep Tre'Quan, get rid of another receiver and hope that he'll be there when the time comes to make that decision. Because there's that 24-hour window of uncertainty, and that scares the hell out of me. So we'll see what happens. But I expect Tre'Quan to be on the roster and then all of a sudden going over to the point where he's on IR, they bring in someone else. I think sometimes the Saints kind of tip their hand. I feel like they're tipping it there. So before I get into any comments you guys have, and I'll pull them up in a sec, there's a couple of roster decisions that I'm just going to breeze over really quick that I think are interesting for the Saints. Lucas Kroll, what do you do with him? I think the Saints end up cutting him. I know he was great last night, but really crowded tight end room. If you could bring him back on the practice squad, awesome. If he gets a chance elsewhere, even better for him. So that's what I feel about him. Running back 3, I say Merriweather over Darrell Williams. I think Merriweather looked better in preseason. I think there's a lot of juice in those legs as opposed to Williams, who right now just looks like he's rusty. And maybe the Saints feel like he can knock off the rust in the next 2 weeks before week 1. But I would trust Merriweather over him. So I would go with Merriweather over Williams. Jontre Kirkland, what do you do with him? Do you keep him on special teams and let Shaheed focus on wide receiver, or do you let him walk? I think it's going to be the let him walk answer. Don't know if I love that, though. What to do at backup O-line? I mean, they all look bad. That's the way I see it. Saints are going to have some cuts to make. I think you're splitting hairs over who you want to keep at this point. Even guys like Lewis Kidd, who I've liked, he played left tackle yesterday, and it was not good. So we'll kind of see how that develops. Nico Lalos, what do you do with him? Production off the charts in the preseason. But the Saints got 8 defensive linemen that they feel good about. Do they want a 9th guy in that room? I don't know. I do not know. But it's a fascinating question that only they can answer, and they'll have to answer in the coming 24 to 48 hours. Keeping DeMarco Jackson felt like a certainty 2 months ago. Doesn't feel like one now. I think Nephi Sewell and Jalen Smith are destined to make the 53-man roster. I know last night I was kind of on Baun about him not doing much in the preseason, but he'll probably be back. I think the Saints just value his special teams. So, that means DeMarco Jackson is in a very, very tough spot. And I think for him, if he makes it, it's specifically because of special teams, nothing else. And then the last thing I want to talk about, the safety spot. I think Ugo Amadi and Jordan Howden are locks to make the roster along with Marcus May and Tyrann Mathieu, which means you have a tough decision to make between Jonathan Abram, Lonnie Johnson, and Smoke Monday. I personally like the idea of bringing in Lonnie Johnson, but I think the Saints can easily go Jonathan Abram and go for a higher upside type of player, but we'll see. But I'm not too worried about that one. I don't think that's going to make or break the Saints season. Like, who's the fifth safety on this roster? If it gets to that point, then something went terribly wrong. So that is where I'm at with all that. Without further ado, guys, let's get into any comments you have on this Monday morning. We'll go through it. Hayden J says, hopefully this week flies by. We need some football back. Yeah, 13 days until the Saints season opener, which means, if my math serves me correctly, 10 days until the first regular season game of the year between the Chiefs and Lions, which should be pretty fun. And if you're a Saints fan, which you are if you're listening, you would want the Lions to lose, because you should always root against the NFC, because you never know when those wins matter. New Daylight Present says, yeah, 2 weeks is too long. And then they added, not sure there's much to discuss, but man, Foskey went from NPC to actual player right there. Yeah, Foskey looked really good in the final preseason game. And I think that for the Saints, that's a very encouraging sign for what he can do. It's all about developing. Like I said, guys, Trey Hendrickson, Davenport, Cam Jordan, guys on the Saints, specifically at D-line, they've taken a year or two to really get their feet under them and get used to what the Saints expect from that position. The real, I guess this is Theseus. If I said it wrong, let me know in the chat. This team has lost some swag. If they start the season fast, this team has some swag, confuse me. Team has some swag. If they start the season fast, they'll be dangerous. But if they start slow, I can see it all crashing. I mean, yeah, I think for New Orleans, the first 4 games, and I might be in the minority of this here, I don't know if I love the schedule. Like, Titans is a tough game. Panthers early, I think, is good, because I don't know if you guys have ever seen, but Frank Reich's teams, they take a long time to get going. He's historically bad in the first month of the season as opposed to other months while he's in charge. So I think that's a favorable game for the Saints. Packers week 3, I don't know what to make out of it, because Jordan Love can easily light it up for the Saints. And then on the flip side, what if he doesn't? Then that might be an easier performance for the team. So I don't know what to make out of that one. And then week 4, I do like that matchup against the Bucs at home. First game with Alvin back on the roster. So I would say maybe 2 of the games I like, which are both division games, which is good for the Saints, because God forbid the Saints started 2-2. If the 2 wins that they had were the division ones, they're still doing what they need to do. Now, I don't say settle for 2-2. Absolutely not. But I think that for New Orleans, there is a spot there where I'm a little unsure. But that Titans game is going to be tough. I keep telling people that's going to be a nice litmus test to start the regular season. Alex Evans says, thoughts on Lelos. Thought he played well last night and last week, but not sure I see a spot for him on the roster. Yeah, it's tough, because he's at that position where, like I said, they got 8 defensive linemen who I think are really talented right now. You have Shepard, Saunders, Brzee, Roach, Cam Jordan, Tano Passanio, Peyton Turner, Carl Granderson. There's your 8. And Lelos' motor's been great. Production's been great. But I just don't know if that means he's going to make the roster. So we'll see what happens. I don't want to make any predictions yet on him, because he's on that fringe. But I thought he looked really good this preseason. And I think even if he doesn't make the roster, maybe he makes someone else's 53. And if not, he's making the practice squad. I thought he was way too good to not. Saints, I believe this is either Saints Tay or Saints T. I was just watching your last night's stream. Yeah, so 2 streams in the last 12 hours. Saints are keeping us busy, which is good. No complaints on this side. Margaret says Pete is always hurt. That is for sure. Jerry says the real season begins in 2 weeks. Regular season games do count. Absolutely. St. John Butler says, what's good, Chris? Nothing, guys. Just going through my my usual Monday morning. And again, glad you guys made it a part of yours. So it's going to be a fun next 2 weeks. I'll tell you, the dog days of, May and June trying to find Saints content, those are over, which I'm glad. Now I just hope the Saints give us positive content, because last year I was sitting there nonstop complaining, and I don't want to complain too much. I don't need to complain every day of my life. Alex says, make or break season for DA. Feels like they'll lean towards safe choices as far as who makes the roster because of that, like Lutz over Groupie, as you mentioned last night. Yeah, I think, like you said, that's a great point. Like, you got to win right now, and you can't worry about tomorrow because you're so focused on today. And I think for the Saints, that's a good reason and a very fair explanation, Alex, that you mentioned, that you will see people not maybe years past, if the Saints had flexibility and long-term security, maybe they'd keep a certain guy on the roster that they wouldn't want to. Like, again, I said it yesterday, I don't think there's a wrong answer to this Groupie versus Will Lutz battle. What I would say, though, is that I would keep Groupie because I value the years over the experience, because I think as a kicker, once you start losing that leg and your accuracy, it doesn't magically come back. Like, that's just who you are and you're trying to deal with it. Where Blake Groupie is 24. I think he's got a leg on him. Kid's kind of has that unfazed swag to him that he seems unbothered in a good way. So we'll see. But I said last night, and I really do mean this, guys, I don't think there is a wrong answer to the Lutz versus Groupie battle. I think if you value experience, you should want Will Lutz. I think if you value the years and the I guess the cheapness of Groupie's contract, then you got your answer right there. Margaret says cut Pete. I don't know. I think for that, it's tough. Again, they could cut him. I don't know if they will, but it's not an easy decision because, like Alex says, and he mentioned, as much as Pete struggled, you can't have enough depth on the O-line. He at least has some pedigree compared to other potential roster cuts, unless you get blown away by a trade offer, which seems to be a popular opinion here. People talk about him being the sixth or seventh best O-line. I'd say sixth. Hurst, McCoy, Ramczyk, Penning, and Ruiz better, obviously. But sixth is still there. And it, again, guys, that's the concern, is if you think he's going to have to start at some point, then maybe you do actually keep him unless you get a trade offer. If they get a trade offer, I say you trade him, because you keep him around, you play him, there's a chance he gets hurt anyway. So I say just keep him. Jerry says Tre'Quan Smith go bye-bye. Yeah, I don't know. I know that's been a popular one, especially you, Jerry. I know you've been waiting for Tre'Quan to go, and I don't blame you. I think there's a lot of Saints fans that are ready for Tre'Quan to go, but I don't know if the Saints are ready for Tre'Quan to go. And obviously, that's the only thing that really matters. Margaret says, I like Lelos. And then Jerry says, Lelos staying. It's possible. It's very possible. He put himself in that spot. I'd say 2 weeks ago, I don't know if I'd feel that way. And then after the last 2 weeks, when this guy has pretty much 3.5 to 4 sacks in a 2-game span, how do you not put yourself on the roster? And how do you not put yourself at least on the bubble, which is what he's done, which is better than where he was before? Shay says, I thought Matt Rhea was a soft tissue guru when they brought him from Bama, but it doesn't seem as so. It's so tough, right? Like, I think that the soft tissue issues for me, I don't know what to make of it. Like, are people not stretching well? Is it bad luck? Is it bad hydration? I have no idea. That's way above my level of knowledge. Or maybe I should start to figure out that problem. But I think for New Orleans, what I can say, and I feel pretty good about it, is that what they didn't do this preseason, and it's something that I mentioned last night, and obviously that changes in a heartbeat if someone gets hurt early, but they didn't suffer any like catastrophic injuries to their team, right? And the Saints didn't lose someone in the preseason that they desperately need for the regular season, and they're out for the rest of the year. That didn't happen, and I think that's a good thing. And, I mentioned the Broncos before. Tim Patrick tore his Achilles. Like, he's out for the year. So I think that for New Orleans, that is definitely the plus there. But I understand why, if people are still frustrated. The Saints have been pretty banged up the last couple of years. Margaret says, we didn't look good stopping the run last night. They didn't. I mean, I guess people will have a rebuttal that it's preseason, but I definitely agree that they did not stop the run well last night. But my argument would be, and my counterpoint was, I thought they looked really good week 1 of the preseason doing that, and I hope that's who they really are. Trevon King says, I love Brzee already. I need to add a little more to his bag so the spin doesn't become predictable. Great to see him using it. Yeah, you kind of have to have that secondary move, so that first move is even more dangerous. But that spin move is Dwight Freeney-esque at times, and I don't use that lightly. Like, I think Brzee's got it. Whatever that it quality is, that that you see a superstar right in front of you as soon as they play, that's what he has right now. And I think for Brzee, again, it's not blowing smoke up a player's ass. It's not trying to hype someone up because they play for the Saints. It's the fact that this guy was the number 1 recruit in high school. In all the 50 states, he was the number 1 player coming out of high school. And freshman year at Clemson was awesome. The problem is he got hurt. So he really is a talented guy. And I am so excited to see how he develops in New Orleans. The Real Theseus says Lelos is a practice squad journeyman. Kind of feels that way. Nat says, ready for the season to start. I hope we don't have so many injuries. 11-6 or 12-5. I would sign up for 11-6 or 12-5 in a heartbeat. But I do think it is an attainable record, right? And that is why I'm on Dennis Allen in terms of pressure's on. Because the roster's there, the schedule's there, the players in terms of win now, but having a nice young blend of veteran experience with young guys who have a lot of potential. it's all there for the taking. So I think that New Orleans has everything they need to be 11-6 or 12-5. And if they don't have everything they need, it's because the coach. So it's going to be up to him. But I do like that. I like that prediction, but they got to stay healthy. Saints Tay says the Denver Saints. It's going to be that way, man, as long as Sean Payton's there. A little poach here, a little poach there. And then before you know it, he's got a bunch of former Saints guys. New Daylight Presents says, which of our players also said they have a surprise before starting the season? I don't remember about surprise. I do remember Demario Davis was kind of hyping up why he feels really good about the Saints this season, but he didn't list the reason why. But he said he feels really good, just didn't list the reason why. That could just be because he likes what he sees in practice. That would be my guess, but who knows? Margaret says our O-line needs to be better for the run game to work. Yeah, it does. I wouldn't put so much stock in yesterday, though, because so yesterday there was no running lanes, and Kendra Miller, every time he got the ball, was met by 15 tacklers. But you got to remember his second-string guys, so I think that played a factor in it. Trevon King says, I feel like the media has talked about Jalen Carter's one pressure against the Ravens more than Brzee as an entirety, which is crazy because I feel like he's flashed just as much. I think he has too. And I actually really like that comment, by the way, because I think it shows us, and I'll lump myself in there too. I think when it comes to certain teams, we kind of gravitate towards some of them and we give them so much attention that we kind of lose sight of other teams that matter. And I think for New Orleans, they're kind of in that spot right now because they struggled last year and because they haven't made the playoffs since 2020. I think that the media is really kind of looking elsewhere, and Philly's kind of that hot toy on the block in terms of they just made the Super Bowl. They have a really exciting roster, and that's where they'll get all the attention. Everyone's all on Howie Roseman and what he's been able to do. And a lot of it is deserved. Don't get me wrong. But I think that's just it. It's like the ebbs and flows of the NFL media cycle. Like if the Saints are really good this year, guys, next year people will talk about the Saints. Maybe not in a good way, right? They'll probably say oh, this is why the Saints will fall off next year because that's all they talk about. But I think that's all it comes down to. But I love that comment because Jalen Carter's been good. I think Brzee been just as good, if not better. You can make an argument. I think Brzee has shown that, man, when you see a guy playing in college and you're like, they're just waiting to get to the NFL, and when they get there, they're going to hit that next spot. That's what it seems like. Margaret says, what was the 95 throws to Kroll in the last 2 minutes? I don't know, man. Hayner got locked in on Kroll, and he wouldn't stop. Any update on May's case? Yeah, so Marcus May, I'll pull it up here just to give you guys the exact specifics here. But that got figured out last week in terms of the legal aspect of it. And I got to find the exact thing. So he got 6 months probation in his DUI case that stems from 2021. He has not gotten suspended yet, though. He can get suspended. He's subject to that suspension or fine. I know he's got community service hours that he either can do or pay off, whichever one. Not sure which route he goes there. But there's a good chance May will get suspended. That's for sure. New Daylight Presents says, oh, yeah, DeMario said he was excited about the season because reasons undisclosed. Maybe it was because of Brzee. It might be, but I definitely think when DeMario says something like that, we all have to stop and we have to listen and also get excited at the same time because I think that this Saints team does have a lot of talent. And again, I don't want to get people so overly optimistic that the regular season starts, the Saints drop week 1 and all of a sudden the sky's falling and you're losing your mind. I think that you take everything kind of with a grain of salt and you take it in stride, but the Saints team is very, very talented. And we'll also see how the rest of the roster looks like. Like I said before, guys, roster cuts will happen in the next couple of days, and the Saints have some tough decisions to make, and I think it's going to be interesting, What's the difference between waivers and being released since the cuts are about to come out? Yeah, so in terms of waivers, obviously there's at different times. Like I know later in the year, I think everyone is subject to waivers, which makes it interesting. But in terms of who's eligible, I think for the waiver process, I think you need either 4 years or less of experience when it comes to who's subject to it. And when you hit waivers, you go through all 32 teams. And obviously the team that cut you is not keeping you. But you go through all 32 teams. Obviously record matters in terms of the waiver order. And you go from there. Everyone's going to have a chance to claim you. If not, then you become a free agent. You get to go wherever. If you're released, you're hitting the open market outright. So makes it pretty easy there. Praying there's some serviceable interior guys that we can snag. I doubt there are, but who knows? New Daylight Presents says, what are the odds the Saints keep both Groupie and Lutz? I think kind of low. I don't think New Orleans wants to do the Blake Gillikin thing from 2020 where they're like, oh, he's hurt, even though he really wasn't hurt. The Saints were just stashing him for 2021. I think Groupie and Lutz are both starting kickers. I think the Saints have a decision to make. I think they're going to keep Lutz. I would keep Groupie. But you know what? That's why the Saints get paid the big bucks to make these type of decisions. And it's not an easy one. And it's one that people are going to complain regardless. If they keep Lutz, people are going to say, why didn't you keep Groupie? If they keep Groupie, people are going to say, why didn't you keep Lutz? You can never win those. But I don't think they'll keep both. Wouldn't mind if they did that, though, because I think Groupie can absolutely be their kicker of the future. But again, if they go with Lutz, familiarity, had a really good camp, maybe that's it. But like I said, guys, it's going to be fun to see how the next 2 days go for the Saints. Tough decisions to make at wide receiver, arguably tight end, but I don't think too much. Offensive line, safety, special teams, both kicker and punter jobs are up for grabs. So it's going to be fun, and we'll see what happens. And, of course, as always, guys, we'll have it broken down for you and analyzed here on the Straight Up Saints podcast and on Buku Media's YouTube page, because I think for us, this is the time of the year. It is content season. But anyway, guys, that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast on this Monday. Will I make a live stream for the final roster? I will do something for sure. I don't know if it'll be pre-recorded or live. If there's something crazy, it'll be live. If it's something that isn't too crazy, maybe pre-recorded, but there will be a show. Absolutely. And of course, as always, guys, make sure you subscribe to Buku Media's YouTube page. Stay tuned for more content here on the Straight Up Saints podcast. Enjoy the rest of your Monday and be on the lookout because we're going to have more Saints news coming soon. There's no doubt about it.